Lightning Spear Sorceress is an incredibly powerful build. You summon lightning spears that cast frozen orbs that summon more lightning spears, all of which allows you to deal massive amounts of damage to both single targets and on AoE using the splintering energy aspect. This build is a little bit convoluted to put together, and it can be quite gear intensive, so it's probably not your best choice if you're just looking to start out with your first build. If you're just starting out, instead, I strongly recommend my Fireball Sorceress build. That requires very little to get off the ground, it's very easy to get into and play, and it's great at farming, say, farming up, for a build like this one, which is exactly what I did. But also, the power level difference between the two builds simply isn't comparable. Lightning Spear is tankier, Lightning Spear is faster, and Lightning Spear does way more damage. So, all told, Lightning Spear is by far the stronger build. In fact, it's one of the strongest builds currently available in Season 5. So I'm going to be going over a few of the choices I made, some of the content that I've tackled, and a few alternatives if you don't have all the recommended gear. Do be sure to get subscribed, leave a like while you're down there, and I look forward to seeing you in future videos. The main reason that I swapped to Lightning Spear is I was tired of farming Infernal Horde 7. Now, Infernal Horde 7 gives 25 Neath Iron per click, Infernal Horde 8 gives 30 on the materials chest, meaning technically there's not that much of a difference. If you can smoothly farm 7s, you're honestly in a pretty good spot already. But 8s are more rewarding. They give more Stygian stones, they give more gold, they give more Neath Iron. More is better. More farming efficiency is also better. And oh my god, the difference is night and day. I can basically just AFK on 8s without having to worry. I don't have to pay attention to most enemy affixes. I just kind of hit all of my defensive buttons, they're up all the time, and my lightning spears instantly annihilate everything on the screen. Which is to say, not only am I farming a higher tier, but it's easier, I die less, and overall, it is a much better experience. So I regret nothing about my swap. Not only can I super smoothly farm 8s, but also I did some pit. Now before, on Fireball, once I got to pit 110-ish, it was really falling off hard, like starting to worry about. I do think if I fixed a couple problems, like remasterworking my Fist of Fate, getting a little bit more single target damage, fixing some of the problems in my gear, which you'll see later in the gearing section, then I could easily do 120 and maybe even push as high as 130, though that might be pushing it. What feels really, really good about this build is you're just spamming all your cooldowns. Like Unstable Currents, which is technically a 40-ish second cooldown, yeah, that just has 100% uptime if you're playing correctly. Lightning Spear functionally doesn't have a cooldown, to the point where you can start stacking attack speed to use Lightning Spear faster because it is coming off cooldown that quickly. And this is because of the powerful effect of Fractured Winterglass, where casting a Frozen Orb has a chance to spawn a random Conjuration, and then your Conjurations have a chance to spawn a Frozen Orb. These two things loop infinitely, giving you infinite damage. Well, okay, not actually infinite damage, but certainly one hell of a lot of damage. There's a very slight ramp time, but it's a short enough ramp that you don't really notice it. In terms of gameplay, once you're up and going, it's really simple. Hit Lightning Spear, and then use Teleport and Ice Armor to make sure the buffs are up 100% of the time, refresh Unstable Currents when it starts to fall off. If you think you're going to die, hit Flame Shield, and if you don't have enough Lightning Spears that the cooldown is instantly coming up, hit Ice Blades a couple times, as this will contribute to removing the cooldown from your Lightning Spear. It's another Conjuration skill, and the enhanced Ice Blade effect is applied to your other skills, thus meaning that when Ice Blades reduces its own cooldown, it also reduces the cooldown of Lightning Spear, Teleport, Ice Armor, Flame Shield, and Unstable Currents. Because your Teleport cooldown is super low, this build is extremely mobile. In fact, short of putting on an Oculus, it's one of the most mobile builds that you can play on Sorceress, and one of the most mobile builds you can play in Diablo 4 in general. On top of all those things, you are surprisingly defensive, even if you're using something like Raiment of the Infinite that causes you to take increased damage by increasing ranks of Glass Cannon. This is through a generous amount of life available from your gear, and the fact that you get a whole bunch of damage reductions for playing lightning damage. So all in all, this build's been super awesome. You could say it's an absolute blast, and it might just have ruined the class for me for the rest of the season, where if I try a different build, it just won't feel the same. It'll either be squishier, slower, or do less damage. But who knows, maybe I'll find something else that's really cool after this. Alrighty, let's get into the skills, passives, Paragon, gearing, and more. Starting with Firebolt. Yep, this probably shouldn't be a surprise at this point. You have to put 2 points somewhere, and Firebolt gives some nice little damage bonuses. As you can see here, we are in fact using the Firebolt enchantment, and Ice Blades for the second enchantment, which I'll explain in just a minute. Then coming back and pulling out the entire tree. For core skills, Charged Bolts and Chain Lightning. This is because, later on, both of these skills are triggered by unstable currents. So you're not casting these, they don't need to be on your bars, nothing like that. It's just free passive benefits. So for Chain Lightning, specifically Destructive Chain Lightning, when it critically strikes, there's a chance to form Crackling Energy. This is for synergies with the Keystone talent selected at the end. For Charged Bolts, on the other hand, Destructive Charge Bolts. 25% damage reduction. That is part of why this build is so absurdly tanky, even if you're using a version that doesn't have Tyrael's Might, which I'll get into later in the gearing section. Then for defensive skills, Teleport. Why? Because it's teleport, and you've got to go fast. With this amount of cooldown recovery, the base cooldown is 6.15 seconds, and trust me, it only gets shorter from there. Teleport is truly actually absurd in this build. With Shimmering for another 30% damage reduction, that honestly, as long as you're rotating things correctly, you should have basically 100% uptime on. Then Ice Armor with Mystical Ice Armor. While it's active, you chill nearby enemies. If you're struggling, and if you don't really have enough cooldown on Ice Armor, and you are hard casting, which is something I'll get into in the end, you can use Shimmering. But the version of a build that I am currently playing does not spend mana, so Mystical Ice Armor is the only viable choice. And next, Ice Blades with Summoned Ice Blades. So, the cooldown reduction from Enhanced Ice Blades, i.e. it's reduced by 0.5 seconds each time it hits a vulnerable enemy, is applied to other skills. This means more uptime on Teleport, more uptime on Ice Armor, more uptime on Lightning Spear, more uptime on all of the cooldown abilities this build uses. This is a super, super, super powerful bonus, and this is why the enchantment is used to spawn more Ice Blades, to then not only have more Conjurations out, but give more cooldown reduction. For Lightning Spear, you might notice, this is rank 1 with 4 from the Shaco. Why on our main damaging skill do we only have 1 rank in Lightning Spear? It's because, realistically, Lightning Spear is just there to apply the splintering energy aspect. The aspect is where all of your damage comes from. Lightning Spear is just applying it, and also stunning enemies. So for more Lightning Spears, the better, but you don't really care how hard each hits individually. Then, rounding things out with some nice defensive bonuses. Again, no Mana Shield, because if you're not spending mana, you don't get any benefits here. And Conjuration Mastery. For each active conjuration, you get a whole bunch of bonuses, and you'll have a ton of active conjurations, so this adds up to a surprising amount of damage. Of course, for extra damage, Glass Cannon is a good passive, and because this is a lucky hit reliant build, Precision Magic rounds things out, though how much impact this is going to have depends on your gear. If you have a really good Fist of Fate, this isn't as important. If you have a bad Fist of Fate, this is super critical and is make or break on your single target damage, though your single target damage is going to struggle without a good Fist of Fate regardless. Coming down here, Icy Veil for additional defenses. You want barriers up all the time. Devouring Blaze, because crowd controlling enemies is really easy, and therefore you get a ton of critical strike damage. Everything's burning from a Firebolt enchantment. Over here, Hoarfrost. Enemies should be chilled. If you aren't using Mystical Ice Armor because you're in an earlier version of a build, you do lose the Hoarfrost damage bonus, which is another reason why this is really good, and chilling enemies is quite nice. And Electrocution for, yes, another damage reduction. Again, you want to be super tanky, so Electrocution is really good to have. Last up, Unstable Currents. Procs a whole bunch of lightning skills, gives you all sorts of passive bonus effects. And coming down here, Overflowing Energy. Crackling Energy hits an additional time, doesn't matter. But when it hits an enemy, your shock cooldowns are reduced by 0.1 seconds or 0.35 against elites, which is a great way to get additional cooldown reduction. Since this is a cooldown build, your whole goal is to keep everything off of cooldown. You want the cooldown reduction. Now, there's another version of a build that I wanted to talk about. That version hard casts Frozen Orb. You will need mana regen for this version. This is for when your Fractured Winter Glass isn't good enough, or you're not geared enough to just spam conjuration skills. So you'll cast Frozen Orb, which then spawns more conjuration skills. Because you're doing it manually in this case, it is more mana intensive with a mana cost of 40. Therefore, you might want to get one of the bonuses over here with Fiery Surge. You'll be killing burning enemies all the time. And you'd probably want to drop something like Hoarfrost, as you're not going to have as reliable uptime spamming stuff chilling things, all that fun stuff. Now, something else that you can pick up if that's the case, you could get Mana Shield. This is a damage reduction for 5 seconds every time you spend 100 mana. You're actually going to be spending mana, so it actually gives a damage reduction. Also, instead of Mystical Ice Armor, since you're not going for the Chill synergy, you could go with Shimmering Ice Armor for additional cooldown reduction to make sure that reaches 100% uptime. But if this reaches 100% uptime without the Shimmering Ice Armor, do not use this. You want cooldown reduction from other sources, otherwise your Conjuration skills are going to be lacking anyway. And being able to chill enemies, honestly, really, really nice. Plus, dealing 15% more damage to frozen enemies, good little bonus there. That said, if you want to know all the details of how you would change around your skill tree when you don't have the optimized endgame version of a build, do check out Northwar's guide over on Maxroll, which, speaking of, that is exactly where I got my Paragon board. I am way too lazy to optimize Paragon boards for myself, so I just copied him. With that said, let's go over the Paragon boards and the glyphs selected. So first up, starter board with Flame Feeder. Increased damage to burning targets, stuff is always going to be burning, and 10% multiplicative damage to burning targets. Damage is good. Next up, coming over here to Tactician, you deal 10% increased damage for 4 seconds after casting a defensive skill. This is increased for each defensive skill not on your action bar. There should be one defensive skill, Frost Nova, not on your action bar, so it's an 8-second bonus. If you are not using at least one defensive skill every 8 seconds, I don't know what you're doing when you're playing this build because Teleport's cooldown is literally shorter than that. So you'll always be using a defensive skill every 8 seconds. It is a permanent 10% damage bonus. This is allocated in the Burning Instinct board. Then coming over here to the Enchantment Master board, there's Elementalist. Dealing fire, cold, or lightning increases all damage you deal by 5% for 10 seconds, stacking once per element. It is really, really, really easy to stack this. The burning deals fire damage. You're using cold and lightning skills. There you go. Fire, cold, and lightning automatically all stacked up. Then third is Frigid Fate. Sorry, fourth is Frigid Fate. Frigid Fate is fourth. You want non-physical damage bonuses to try to get this as close to 60% as you can. My gear isn't perfect, so the bonus also isn't perfect. And this is where the charged glyph goes. Picking up Crackling Energy grants 5%, stacking up to 15, multiplicative damage for 5 seconds. With all the Crackling Energy generated by Chain Lightning, this should be fully stacked 100% of the time, and you don't really care about the Crackling Energy damage here, that's not the point, but hey, it is kind of nice. Then, you want to come over here to the Elemental Summoner board, which you do want to take the major note on, because A, reduced cooldown on Conjuration skills, very good. Also, bonus damage from Conjuration skills that stacks up really easily. And you put the Conjurer glyph here, not just because it happens to go really well with a theme, but also because Conjuration skills have 20% increased duration, which means they get way more Conjuration skill uptime. 20% increased duration, 20% more active at a time, more bonuses from Conjuration Mastery. And for every 5 intelligence within range, they gain increased damage, which is something. It's not much, but it is something. Then last up, the final 2 boards, the order does not really matter that much as you're not getting the additional bonuses. But they are Ceaseless Conduit, really just a travel board with Destruction. The good old critical strike damage, enemies take increased damage. This will be stacked up to 12%, almost instantaneously, and remain stacked for the entire fight. And then last up, Searing Heat, another travel board here, where you place the Exploit glyph for dealing damage to a vulnerable enemy, stacks up to 10% really quickly, yet another multiplicative damage bonus. And again, check out Northwar's guide over on Maxroll if you want any of the details for different Paragon board setups at different stages of gearing. Okay, let's talk about the gear, legendary aspects, and some alternatives where applicable. First up, Forbidden Shaco Harlequin Crest. You really, really, really want this item for the massive 39% cooldown reduction, and you want at least 2 masterworks on the cooldown, ideally all 3, ideally greater affix cooldown reduction. I would not personally advise playing this build without the crest. You just lose so much cooldown that it's going to be a struggle. You're going to have to cast Frozen Orb yourself, and overall the damage will feel lackluster in comparison. That said, Tyrael's Might, while it is a really good defensive option, is by no means mandatory, so you don't need multiple Ancestral Mythic uniques. Instead, you can use Raiment of the Infinite. You want at least double Tempers on the Glass Cannon. Double Masterworks on the Glass Cannon, with the third being whatever you happen to hit. This would provide a lot more damage, and I mean a lot more damage, up to, I believe it's 40% more if you have a Greater Affix and all Perfect Masterworks. At the current rank, it's about 20% more, but it also cuts your effective health in half in comparison to materials, possibly cuts it by even more versus elemental damage. So, if you want to be tanky, you can use Tyrael's. This build does have enough damage reductions and other defenses that you can absolutely use Raiment of the Infinite. Personally, I like the Tyrael's because I happen to have it and it's a comfort pick. If you're looking to do this on a budget, you have less gear, go for Raiment of the Infinite, enhance Glass Cannon as much as possible. As long as you remember to hit your Flame Shield when you're tanking a big old hit, you will be fine. Then there's Fist of Fate, which is primarily worn for the lucky hit chance. The your attacks randomly deal blah 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 does not apply to this build because this is a legendary aspect proccing off of a skill, not the skill itself. All you really care about is the lucky hit chance roll. Attack speed is nice, crit is nice, get a good lucky hit, try to enhance it as much as possible. This is a really mediocre pair of Fists of Fate. I should have 2 lucky hit Masterworks here, not the lucky hit, crit, and attack speed, but I've been rather unlucky. It's like 1 in 25 on average to hit it, and I'm at like 60 so far, and I haven't hit the double lucky hit chance. I'm probably going to try it a little bit more, just to see how the build performs. Overall, though, I'm not too concerned about it, to be honest with you. The build is already amazing. If you have regular gloves with lucky hit greater affix and 2 Masterworks, that should also work as an alternative until you can get a good Fists of Fate, but I would recommend Fists of Fate, especially for single target damage. When I was getting up to like pit 110, pit 120, that's where I really started to notice them taking effect. Then, Runic Leggings of the Orange Herald. This is any pair of legendary pants with Orange Herald. The nice thing about Orange Herald is this is going to proc constantly, so you reduce the cooldown of your ultimate by 2 seconds, effectively meaning your ultimate has permanent uptime when combined with your other cooldown reduction sources. And then the Lightning Spear lucky hit chance is, of course, just to make sure it's proccing even more. That way, you get more consistency. In terms of any other Masterworks, any other Tempers, Ice Armor Duration is a very nice defensive bonus. It makes it much easier to keep up. And the Masterworks, Lightning Spear lucky hit, Max Life is also pretty good if you want some extra survivability. The last affix doesn't have to be life per second. It's just what I settled on because I kept not hitting what I wanted. Any other defensive modifier, armor, dodge chance, all of them work. Which, on that note, if you aren't using materials, you will need at least 1, if not 2, additional diamonds for the all elemental resistance. If your armor goes too low, get armor on your pants to solve it. Or, who knows, maybe hit a Masterwork here on your Harlequin crest and get even more armor that way. Then, Esu's Heirloom. Really nice pair of boots that gives you a whole bunch of critical strike damage. And your crit strike chance is increased by 40% of your move speed bonus with a perfect roll. Unfortunately, mine is very far from perfect. It has big shiny crit damage. Sadly, it's only 29% out of a 40 perfect mid roll. Because you get conditional movement speed after killing an elite, and evade grants 125% movement speed for 3 seconds, you do want to evade on cooldown for optimal damage. Right here, you can see 57.9% crit chance, and now 70%. So after killing an elite, that goes slightly higher. And that leaves me at a pretty good spot in terms of my crits, where most hits are going to crit, and get all those massive bonuses from almost 2,000% critical strike damage, assuming the tooltip's accurate. But I don't really trust tooltips, so who knows. Next up, the Seer's Staff of Splintering Energy. Critical strike damage is really good, both in terms of a temper and in terms of a greater affix on the item. Those are the 2 things that you want to masterwork, and ideally, the temper is a little bit better to masterwork just because the range scales up higher. You also want chance for a second lightning spear to be cast, as close to 100% as possible, and critical hits with lightning spear cause lightning to arc from it The aspect of Splintering Energy is all of your damage, so you want that roll to be as high as possible. Mine is at almost 4.7k out of 4.853. If I could get that 4853, I would absolutely get a noticeable damage increase over what I'm doing right now. But in terms of arrest for rolls on weapon, honestly, as long as it has crit damage and you end up hitting your tempers here, don't worry about arrest. The max life and yeah, sure, it's nice, but it could be vulnerable damage. It could really be anything else, and that would be just fine as long as you have the double crit damage and the lightning spear cast. Next up, Fractured Winterglass. This is a make or break. You really cannot play this build without Fractured Winterglass. Also, you will want to masterwork. The Conjuration cooldown is reduced. This way, you get more Frozen Orbs because you are casting more Conjuration skills, and ideally, the unique power, casting a Frozen Orb, has a chance to spawn a Conjuration. Your Conjurations have a chance to spawn a Frozen Orb. This is a very powerful synergy that effectively allows the build to infinitely loop itself, which, as you can tell, this version of the item is not super amazing for. It is only 46 and 64% out of the 65 and 90. Having better rolls here would absolutely help me. Unfortunately, the only one I found had a terrible Conjuration cooldown roll of 0.4, and it also had terrible Conjuration mastery. It had terrible everything. So in the future, I'm hoping to get a better roll here, or at the very least, if I continue to play the build, I'll hope to get a better roll here. And then last up, the 2 rings. You want to use Frozen Orbit. This causes your Frozen Orb to explode 2 additional times, i.e. more chances to proc the Conjuration skill. The actual roll on the legendary power does not matter. Use any legendary aspect of any roll as long as it's Frozen Orbit. 45, 65, you're not doing damage with your Frozen Orb. You're doing damage with your Conjuration, or more accurately, with the proc of Splintering Energy from the Conjuration skill. Then, you also want Storm Swell, because you deal increased damage to vulnerable enemies while you have a barrier. You always have a barrier. And so yeah, that is very, very strong. The other really important thing here, and this is one place where my gear isn't perfect and isn't even great, the Lightning Spear cooldown reduction. You want at least 2 Masterworks on that temper. So this one, the 24.4, pretty much perfect. The crit strike chance, greater affix, also relevant. Instead of vulnerable damage, I really should have critical strike damage. More attack speed means more Conjuration skill casts. Crit strike chance, of course, to get to 100%. Crit damage, more direct damage scaling because it scales Splintering Aspect. The crit strike damage temper itself, it'd be nice if it was better than the minimum of 90.6, but with a perfect cooldown reduction, hey, I guess I'll take it. This one, the crit is much better. It's max rolled, but sadly the Lightning Spear cooldown is very low, which means I should redo this ring. Unfortunately, the reason that I haven't redone this ring is I keep bricking it on the temper phase. But hey, once I finish bricking it, I have plenty of materials to masterwork. Surely I can't use all of these materials and fail to hit a double masterwork on a specific item. Surely that's definitely not happened to me before. So in terms of things that you absolutely need, in my opinion, to play this build, the Shaco and the Fractured Winterglass. You can drop materials, you can drop the Fist of Fate. Just keep in mind that the materials will cost you quite a bit of defenses. The Fist of Fate will cost you quite a bit of single target, but you won't notice it when clearing. You probably won't even notice it when doing Infernal Hordes. Esus, while it's relatively easy to get, also probably not mandatory, though you'll notice it on the damage, especially if you aren't crit capped or you don't have a lot of critical strike chance, which is going to be pretty difficult to get without the bonus from these boots. And then, of course, for the staff, you absolutely need a high roll of Splintering Energy, because that is all the build's damage. If you can't get that, then I would play something else like Fireball Sork or Chain Lightning, use that to farm up, swap over to Splintering Energy once you're able to get the really high roll of Splintering Energy. Okay, so that's the Lightning Spear setup. I have to say, I haven't really deviated too much from what Northward did, because if it works, why try to fix it? If I attempted to improve it, honestly, at this point, I'd probably just make it worse, as the setup already feels heavily optimized. But that said, my gear is far from optimized. I could have a much better Fractured Winterglass. My current one is mediocre at best. I could have much better Esus, and I could have significantly better rings. One ring in particular is honestly just a little bit above straight trash. So, this is not even the peak of a build performance, and it is already destroying everything. This is very much one of those moments where you say, hey, this is probably a little bit OP, so I wouldn't be surprised if in future seasons it was nerfed. In fact, I almost wouldn't be surprised if in Season 5 it wasn't nerfed at least a little bit to bring it back down to earth. Then again, Blizzard never fixed ball lightning, so who knows? Maybe it just gets a free pass. But all the damage aside, I've got to say it's pretty darn fun. If you told me this skill has a cooldown, but you'll hold down the button and it'll be coming off cooldown faster than you can cast it unless you stack attack speed, at first I wouldn't have believed you. But now, oh my god, that is actually how it feels once you've properly ramped up, which is completely insane. And again, with a better Fractured Winterglass, better overall gear, all of this could get even more ridiculous. I'm pretty sure you could get like 50 plus Conjurations all on screen, at which point, good luck seeing mechanics of all the frozen orbs. Then again, if you're wearing Ethereals, maybe you don't need to see too much because you're going to tank it anyway. And as much as this build feels super OP to me, my experience this season has been exclusively on Sorc. So I'm curious, how does this compare to Druid, Barbarian, Rogue, and Necromancer? Can all of those classes just automatically AFK in 8s? Do they have some good builds that really excel and some builds that struggle? Let me know some of your experiences playing the other classes down in the comments below. Now, if you are looking to farm the Infernal Hordes and you want a good strategy, I'll link down below with what I've been using. It gets me 300 to 500 very consistently, and I believe my record is now just shy of 1,000 Ether. So in short, it works pretty well. I'll also link to my starter version of the Fireball Sorceress in case you are just starting out and you need something to get going, farm up all the rest of the gear for this character. And last but not least, if you want to keep up with all the other games that I'm playing, things that I find cool, stuff that I'm highlighting, maybe a hidden indie gem here and there, then check out my recent The Best Games That I Played video, which I'll link up in the card and down below. Of course, before I go, a special thanks to my patrons and channel members for the continued support. For as low as $1 a month, you can help make videos just like this one possible. Link to support is also below. And a big thanks to everyone who watched to the end. I'm glad you enjoyed seeing my thoughts on the Lightning Spear Sorceress. Personally, I've had a blast with the build. The only question is it going to ruin Sorceress as a class for me? Am I going to be playing another Sorceress build after this, or am I just going to be done? I don't know, Cataclysm has been really fun, Black Myth Wukong's coming out soon, might just be that I get distracted by other games, but hey, we'll have to see in future videos, and I hope to see you there.